Revenge with Karen.
I knew something stank the minute I saw a payment for $24,872.09 go through to a vendor we supposedly stopped using 6 months ago. The invoice said backdated IT support, but I checked the licensing logs. No tickets, no logins, no support calls, no nothing. Ghost money. That was my first red flag, not the intimacy kind you get from some workplace romance story where everyone ends up on a yacht. No, this was the kind of flag that flaps slowly, in a dead hallway at 10:42 p.m., while your fluorescent light flickers like it's mocking your existence. See, I was the kind of employee you don't remember inviting to meetings, but always rely on for one quick check. I lived between Excel tabs and compliance dashboards. No one ever saw me eat lunch, most probably assumed I charged myself to a forgotten cubicle and ran on coffee and existential dread. My official title? Senior Compliance Analyst. My unofficial title? Spreadsheet Janitor. People would walk by my office after hours like they were passing a haunted house, quiet, dark, except for one glowing screen and the sound of someone typing like they were trying to banish demons through formulas. And then came Julia. Julia with a J, CFO's little princess, straight from a 9-week executive acceleration course in some Scottsdale resort that somehow qualified her to become our director of financial strategy. She looked like a walking Pinterest board for girl boss aesthetics and spoke like a TED talk had a baby with a wine spritzer. On her first day, she walked past my desk, saw me knee-deep in quarterly reconciliation logs, and muttered, "Yikes, why bother?" Like she just stepped in a puddle of loser. Now, before we go further, I gotta ask you something. If you're still listening to this and your coffee hasn't gone cold yet, maybe take half a second to tap that like button and subscribe. Apparently, 93% of y'all just float through these stories like ghosts in Julia's head. No trace, no commitment. And I get it. Commitment's hard. So is sitting through a 3-hour board meeting while someone takes credit for your work and mispronounces fiduciary. So help the team out. We survive on caffeine and digital love. Back to Julia. She didn't bother with numbers. She bothered with aesthetics. One time she asked if we could jazz up the reports with emojis. I told her compliance audits weren't jazz clubs, and she rolled her eyes like I just told her Santa wasn't real. She called me Nancy Numbers at one point publicly. Thought it was hilarious. Laughed like a hiccuping hyena in front of the VP of Finance. Nancy here thinks double-checking vendor payments is like her life's mission. Isn't that adorable? But I kept my mouth shut. Always did. I'd learned a long time ago that power didn't come from volume. It came from the quiet accumulation of receipts, so I started logging everything. Every anomaly, every after-hours adjustment, every vendor line Julia claimed to have streamlined. And I logged it all under my own credentials. My work badge, my timestamp, no delegation, no shared folders, no edits by others, just me. The spreadsheet ghost with a memory like a steel trap and a grudge like a loaded slingshot. The more I looked, the more the numbers started whispering stories of inflated reimbursements, rounded up mileage logs, contractor rates that didn't match what legal had on file. Minor stuff, paper-cut wounds, easy to miss in daylight, bleeds like hell in the dark. Julia didn't notice, too busy taking selfies in the glass conference room and calling them vision strategy moments. But others did. Juniors started messaging me quietly, asking why their reconciliations weren't adding up anymore. I gave them just enough to fix it without stepping on her toes. I wasn't out to burn anyone, not yet. But somewhere between the 15th streamlined vendor and Julia being praised at an all-hands for tightening financial leaks, I made a decision. I wasn't going to save her anymore. Let the ship drift. I'd already packed my own raft, and I made damn sure it had my name on every plank. Julia's voice carried like a fart in church, loud, embarrassing, and impossible to ignore. She'd waltz past my desk in those overpriced heels that sounded like empty threats and toss out her usual greeting. "Still here, Nancy Numbers." Let me guess, another romantic night with a pivot table. Cue laughter from the other bobbleheads who'd rather kiss upward than speak truth. I didn't even flinch. Just kept typing, eyes on my screen, fingers dancing across numbers she couldn't pronounce if you spotted her the decimal. Because what was I supposed to say? "Yes, Julia, I'm staying late again to fix the thing you swore was already reconciled, except it's bleeding inconsistencies like your ethics on a wine flight." She'd found a new hobby, performative humiliation. like some middle school mean girl who inherited QuickBooks and a company badge. In meetings, she'd fake a yawn every time I spoke, once even whispering loud enough for everyone to hear, "She talks like Excel had a baby with Ambien." Real creative, that one. Gave her 2 months before she started asking ChatGPT to do her job for her. Hell, maybe she already had. The junior analysts were scared of her. One poor kid, Evan, fresh out of college and still clinging to the hope that hard work meant something, brought up a flagged duplicate invoice in a team sync. Said he noticed it had the same vendor ID as a March payment, but different service descriptions. Julia's response? A slow turn. She was auditioning for a villain role on Bravo, and then, "Wow, Evan, you're adorable. Do you think you're here to audit me? You're an analyst, not Sherlock Holmes. Stay in your lane." I watched his ears turn red. He muttered something and stared down at his screen like it might swallow him whole, so I opened Slack. "You're not wrong. Forward the invoice IDs to me. Quietly. I've got it." He didn't respond for 5 minutes, just a single emoji. Folded hands, I cleaned up the mess she'd left again and submitted the correction under my own credentials. Again, and logged everything again. It was becoming muscle memory. But the irritation, that started to hum like a fridge motor you can't unhear once you notice it. Then came the whisper campaign. Not from Julia, she was too busy aligning her chakras with color-coded Outlook folders, but from the VPs. Hallways got quieter when I walked by. Meeting invites stopped coming or came without agendas. Someone accidentally forwarded me a red-line doc labeled Acquisition Prep, Q2 Q4 Financials. I wasn't supposed to see it, but there it was. And you know what was worse? Julia's name was in the author metadata, her. The same woman who once asked me if margin adjustment was a thing accountants do at the gym. That night, I stayed even later than usual. Not because of duty, not because I was some hero trying to save the ship, but because rage, when filtered through a disciplined mind, becomes structure. I reorganized every vendor log from the past 4 quarters. I built an index of anomalies. I wrote one line at the top of a new document, submitted by credentialed staff only. See revision log for independent verification. It looked innocent enough, legalese buried under data. But it would matter. It would absolutely matter, because if Julia was going to sell my work as hers to grease the wheels of an acquisition, she was going to choke on the footnotes. She didn't know it yet, but I'd already handed the matchbook to the liar. The question wasn't if this would burn, it was who'd be standing when the smoke cleared. The moment I knew I was being ghost-written out of my own damn work came during a Tuesday morning ops sync that should have been as boring as unsalted oatmeal. I was half listening, half meaning I had one AirPod in and was mentally arranging my to-do list like a war plan, when our VP of Ops, Tim, said something that stopped me cold. "I just want to give a quick shout-out to Julia for the phenomenal audit readiness improvements," he said, grinning like a man who just discovered flavored yogurt. Seriously, the last quarter's cleanup has been chef's kiss. Legal was impressed. Finance is thrilled. I blinked. Then I blinked again, because I knew what he was talking about. That cleanup was my work, my long nights with invoices spread across 2 screens, my Saturday afternoons elbow-deep in vendor logs, while Julia was probably somewhere exfoliating with $80 glitter clay. I didn't speak, didn't twitch, just stared at the shared screen where she smiled politely and did that awful thing she always did with her eyebrows, raising them like, "Golly gee, I guess I am brilliant, huh?" I Slack pinged from Evan. "Thought that was yours." "It was. Want me to say something?" "No, he left it there. Smart kid, because here's the thing. When someone takes credit for your labor, your ego wants to scream, 'That was me.' Your heart wants to cry. But your spine, if you've got one made of tempered steel and old grudges, stays real still. Because if they're dumb enough to steal from the ghost in the room, they're not smart enough to cover their tracks." And I don't yell. Document? That night, I didn't just stay late. I set up a new system, a quiet one. I made duplicate copies of every compliance file I touched, and I timestamped the hell out of them, modification logs, version histories, digital fingerprints you couldn't scrub with a pressure washer. Then I took it one step further. I created a private archive, not on the cloud, not on the company server, on a secure drive tied to my personal email. Every file I edited, every cell I corrected, every policy note I adjusted, I exported a version and emailed it to myself with a specific format. Subj. Revision log Q3 file name date by my name somewhere around the 3rd batch of reports. I started including footnotes. Not explanations. Just citations. See CFO memo dated X. See legal flag on vendor Y. edited under credential ID, mine. It was like building a time capsule for a future trial, or maybe a nuclear shelter, one that only opened when the radiation hit a certain level of bullshit. And make no mistake, Julia was radioactive. She kept recycling my work into glossy reports with pastel-colored headers and BuzzFeed-level taglines like "Clean books equals clean future." She once added clip art. Clip art. I thought about slamming my head into my monitor until it cracked or I blacked out, whichever came first. But I didn't. Just added another file to the archive. I stopped correcting her mistakes unless they affected my personal metrics. She started to notice small things unraveling, minor imbalances, misaligned totals. Nothing catastrophic yet, just paper cuts. The kind that build up until your hands are too bloody to type. And I kept working. Quietly, precisely, invisibly. I was done begging for recognition. Done playing the ghostwriter in her fairy tale. Let her sparkle her way through meetings and charm half the board. Let her pretend she was running the show. Because I wasn't building a case anymore. I was building a trap. The first sign that Julia was drowning without my invisible hands propping her up came in the form of a 7:13 a.m. calendar invite she sent out titled urgent. Data sync and alignment huddle, which in normal people language, and I broke something and need someone to fix it before the adults notice. I didn't accept. I didn't decline either. Just let it sit there like a moldy sandwich in the fridge, unclaimed, unwanted, and eventually someone else's problem. That was my new mantra. Let Julia rot in her own glitter-coated mess. I'd officially removed myself from all her shared folders the night before. Quietly. No announcements. No confrontations. Just revoked my own permissions on every Q4 final V7 actual final document she'd copied my data into. Then I stopped replying to her late-night slacks that always started with "Hey ye, quick Q," and ended with, "I think I broke something lol." I didn't cover for her anymore. And wouldn't you know it, like clockwork, the numbers started to bleed. Tiny things at first, totals that didn't align, vendor IDs that looped back to dormant contracts. Her streamlined expense report listed a vendor twice under slightly different names. Texas LLC and Texas LLC, classic rookie error, something even a board intern would have flagged. But there were no board interns left. Julia had let them go during her brief attempt at budget heroism. She called it leaning out. What she meant was, less people to question me, or time for me to put on my visionary face. So when the report started unraveling, she did what Julia always did, scrambled for glitter instead of glue. She held a Zoom with the CFO and talked in circles about legacy discrepancies from pre-acquisition planning while waving her perfectly manicured hands, like that could hypnotize anyone into ignoring the math. But math doesn't care how shiny your nails are. Math bites back. The real kicker came from compliance. Our internal auditor, Danielle, bless her no bullshit soul, sent an email with the subject line. Vendor approval trail urgent clarification needed. The body of the message was short. Julia, I'm unable to locate the approval documentation for vendor hash 2849, listed as active in Q2Q3. Last known contact was dated November of the previous fiscal year. Please confirm the approval date, credentialed staff reviewer. Justification memo per SOX standards. Thanks, Danielle. I saw the email because Julia had forwarded it to me. With just 3 words, can you handle? No, I could not. I let that email rot too. 2 hours later, Julia replied to Danielle herself. I watched it all unfold because Danielle, being Danielle, CC'd the full thread to legal. Julia's reply was a masterpiece of desperation dressed up as confidence. Hi, Danielle. Vendor hash 2849 was approved per our March review. Attaching the summary sheet here. Jules, accept the summary sheet. It was from last year. Old logos, obsolete codes. A quick Control plus F showed no mention of that vendor. And to anyone who actually checked metadata, it hadn't even been opened since January. I didn't say a word, just archived the thread and added it to my private log. Julia false vendor reply no documented approval 9:48 a.m. She tried calling me that afternoon. Twice. I let it ring. My emotional state wasn't rage, wasn't even satisfaction. It was a cold kind of disengagement, like watching a squirrel run into traffic. You don't root for it, but you also don't stop it. Nature has rules, and Julia was breaking all of them. The CFO, still under the delusion that his daughter was some kind of financial Mozart, continued parroting her talking points in meetings. But other people, they weren't so sure. Danielle, legal, even our finance controller started asking more direct questions about audit trails, sign-offs, credentialed edits. And those questions, funny enough, all pointed to a single person. Me. Because, unlike Julia, I knew how to leave breadcrumbs. And I wasn't laying a path to safety. I was laying one straight to the pit she dug. The email hit like a cold slap. Subject, discrepancy summary, immediate action required. Sent from legal, not the interns, not the compliance team, internal counsel. That's how you knew it was real. Like the moment a schoolyard fight stops being shoves and someone pulls a knife, now it's everyone's business and the principal's watching. Inside, bullet points, all red. Vendor approval trail missing, Q2. Duplicate payments, Q3/Q4. Questionable reimbursement approvals, CFO's office. Audit trail mismatches across final sign-off logs. At the bottom, a single line that made my stomach turn, not out of fear, but recognition. We will be initiating a special internal audit ahead of the investor review. That was the spark. The kind of memo that travels faster than gossip at a company party. Within 24 hours, the executive floor was on edge. Meetings were rescheduled, which really meant crisis mode roundtables. Calendars blacked out. Julia walked around with her phone glued to her hand, smile twitching like a bad Botox job. Gone was the breezy swagger and faux zen persona. Now she was chewing gum like it owed her rent and whispering in corners like the walls had ears. Because they did. The walls, the spreadsheets, the credential logs, I was the walls. And then the big dog stirred. The CEO, Mr. Just loop me in if there's a fire. Well, the building was smoking now, and he showed up in the Thursday all-hands with a face like he'd bitten into a lemon, dipped in battery acid. We're going to clear this up, he said, eyes scanning the Zoom boxes like he could smell guilt. I want full transparency ahead of next week's investor review. No surprises. Legal and finance will be coordinating with each department lead to ensure clean reporting. If you have something to disclose, now's the time. I sat frozen, not because I was afraid, because I knew I had the only clean copies, the real files. I'd built them not for praise, but protection, and now they were fireproof. That afternoon, Julia made her move. She replied to an executive thread titled Vendor Contract, Review Historical Approvals, with a message that practically screamed scapegoat season has begun. Reviewed the reports in question, and believed the inconsistencies stem from legacy data managed by my name in prior quarters. I've asked her to provide clarity and reconcile accordingly. She might as well have signed it best, Julia, Queen of Weasels. I stared at the screen for 10 full seconds, then leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of now-cold coffee. My inbox pinged again. A reply from Dominic in finance. Short, surgical. Just to clarify, all reconciliations from Q2 onward were submitted under my NameS login credentials. Yes, but they were also logged in the compliance system separately. I've reviewed them. They're accurate. Then another ping, Danielle from compliance, confirming her logs are the only ones with valid credential trails. Everything else was modified post-submission without approval. That's not allowed. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat, just minimized the window and opened a blank email draft addressed to no one. Typed a subject line, full reconciliation index personal archive copy. Attached a PDF with every audit trail I'd compiled. Every timestamp, every discrepancy, every receipt. I didn't send it, not yet, but I left it open like a loaded weapon. The funny thing about silence is people think it means guilt or weakness. But silence can also mean leverage. Let Julia flail at her burn calories spinning stories. My work was already whispering its own version of the truth, line by line, entry by entry. And the people who mattered, they were listening now. 2 days after legal dropped the grenade and finance pulled the pin, Julia came clicking down the hallway like nothing had happened, like she wasn't circling the drain in a designer blouse. I was at my desk, eating the same sad tuna salad I always did when the office air got heavy with fear. She leaned on the cubicle wall with a grin she probably practiced in the bathroom mirror. Hey, superstar, she said, voice dipped in fake honey. We're doing a team lunch Friday. Just something casual to decompress, you know, my treat. A few weeks ago, I'd have assumed she meant well, that maybe the stress was getting to her and she wanted to play nice. But now I knew what she was doing. Damage control, optics, a photo op for HR. She probably already had the caption planned out. Teamwork makes the dream work, briefcase sparkling hash women in finance. I didn't answer immediately. just forked another bite of tuna into my mouth and nodded like I was considering it. Then said flatly, "I'm good. Got some backlogged reconciliations to finalize." Her smile twitched like it wanted to run off her face but didn't get permission. "Aw, come on. You've been working so hard. You deserve a little break." "No such thing as a break during audit season," I replied. "Isn't that what you always say?" She stared for a beat too long, then let out a brittle laugh that bounced off the cubicle walls and died in the carpet. "You're too much, girl," she said, and left before I could respond. Not that I would've, because I wasn't playing her game anymore. 15 minutes later, Evan, our junior analyst turned quiet sentinel, slid into the seat across from me and whispered, "Tried to pin the Q3 numbers on you again. In the Slack with ops and legal. Claimed you missed key vendor flags. I didn't flinch. Did they buy it? Not even a little." Dominic replied with a screenshot of the sign-off log. "Yours was clean. Hers wasn't even in the doc history." I nodded, "Thanks." He hesitated, then added, "Word is the CEO wants to see both versions of the reports this week. Like side by side." That was the moment. The fork in the road. Could have made nice. Could have played along, let Julia slap her name on my work one more time in exchange for a clean exit or a vague LinkedIn endorsement. But I wasn't interested in compromise. I was interested in clarity, so I opened my private archive, now a polished machine of digital evidence. I'd color-coded everything: green for reconciled entries, yellow for flagged items, red for manipulated documents. Every tab hyperlinked, every vendor cross-verified, every file metadata locked and watermarked with my credentials. Then I opened the version Julia had submitted to legal. It was chaos. Merged cells, broken formulas, missing source links. A vendor log from Q2 listed Texas Inc. with a monthly payment of $11,200, but the actual contract I'd found showed $8,600. Multiply that across 5 months. You've got $13,000 in unexplained fluff. My copy had the correct amount, a scanned invoice, and an approval memo from legal dated the same week. Hers had a highlighted comment bubble that said, and I quote, "Fix this lol." She hadn't even removed it. I closed the report and exhaled slow. This wasn't a war anymore. It was a cleanup job. The kind you do after a hurricane, except the hurricane wore Gucci loafers and had a LinkedIn bio that included the phrase financial visionary. Let her try to re-ingratiate. Let her take the team to lunch and post selfies with cappuccinos and hashtags about resilience. It didn't matter anymore, because by the end of this week, the numbers would speak, and her version of the truth would collapse under the weight of my footnotes. The calendar update came in at 8:04 a.m., sharp and sterile. Emergency board session AC. Readiness conf RM /Zoom link attached CEO present. The subject line alone was enough to freeze a dozen stomachs mid-sip. Not because board meetings were rare, hell, this company had more board meetings than working printers, but because this one was being labeled emergency, and the CEO was flying in. He hadn't shown up in person in over a year. Julia, naturally, treated the news like an audition for her one-woman Broadway show. She showed up to the office in a high-waisted power suit the color of Risset, as if that might soften the blows coming. She strutted around with her iPad clutched like a holy book, whispering to people in that condescending sing-song she thought made her sound in control. "Don't worry, I've got it. I own the books." She said that last part loud enough for me to hear as she passed. I didn't look up. Didn't need to. My job was already done. That morning, before most people even clocked in, I uploaded the full audit trail, every timestamp, every approval chain, every clean copy of every report, to a secure portal reserved for legal and executive admin. I'd even included a cover note. Short, professional, unemotional. Attached are complete compliance logs and reconciliations, submitted under credentialed staff access, with metadata intact and vendor documents hyperlinked. Best, my name no frills, no ego, just the kind of cold clarity that speaks louder than panic. I didn't tell anyone I did it, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need an audience. Let Julia put on her show. Let her wave charts and flash buzzwords. Let her pretend. I'd built a truth so clean, it gleamed. As the day wore on, the mood in the office dropped a few degrees. People spoke quieter. Slack messages got shorter. Even the finance bros who usually yacked about fantasy football in the break room just stared at their screens like they were waiting for an execution live stream. Danielle from compliance passed my desk around 10:30, coffee in hand, gave me a single nod. That was all. like a soldier acknowledging a bomb was already under the floor. The storm was forming, and everyone felt it. Julia spent the next few hours flitting between huddles and corners, dragging Evan into a whisper session by the elevators. He returned 5 minutes later looking like he needed a drink and a witness. I didn't ask, didn't have to. I knew the script she was running, loop in the juniors, sugarcoat the timeline, polish her version until it felt real. But facts don't care about feelings, and mere data doesn't lie. At 1:02 p.m., sent out a company-wide email, looking forward to presenting our audit readiness report at today's board session. Big thanks to everyone who contributed. Julia, Director of Financial Strategy, it was cute, really, like watching someone decorate a sinking lifeboat. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. Conf room had been cleared. Water bottles lined the table like a peace offering. A massive screen waited at the head, ready to display either salvation or judgment. I didn't bring my laptop. I didn't need to present. I had already presented the truth in the only language that mattered, evidence. As the chairs filled, as legal counsel trickled in with notepads and unreadable expressions, as the CFO looked everywhere except at me, I sat in the back, hands folded, spine straight. Still, not smug, not nervous, just ready. Because Julia was about to walk into that room, still thinking she owned the books. She hadn't realized yet, books had already been audited. By me. The boardroom had the acoustics of a church right before a scandal breaks. Too quiet, too tense, too many throats clearing, and papers rustling like they had something to say but were too scared to say it. The CEO sat at the head of the table, stone-faced, one AirPod still in from the flight. Legal was on his left. CFO on his right, looking like he'd aged a decade in a week. Julia, bathed in nervous energy and perfume, seated center-left, her iPad glowing like a confession booth. The screen at the front flickered to life. Legal plugged in a drive. A folder opened. One file sat inside, named in all caps, no emojis, no pastel headers. Compliance Recon Final V3 by user PDF. The CEO leaned forward, elbows on the table. Before we begin, he said, voice flat as drywall, I want clarity. Who maintained the audit trail for the last 3 quarters? Julia barely let him finish. My team, she said, bright and crisp like this was a TED talk and not a crucifixion. We collaborated across finance and compliance to ensure transparency. I supervised all submissions. Nobody said a word, not even the CFO, and that man could usually talk his way out of an oil spill. Legal clicked the file open. Pages of dense data populated the screen. Timestamps, entries, credential logs. Everything documented, orderly, unflinching. Each of these records, the corporate attorney began, was submitted under a single user credential. No group access. No shared editing rights. She paused, turned toward the CEO, then back to the room. The user, protagonist's full name. The silence was a punch. Julia blinked. Well, yes, of course. She handled the inputs. But I mean, we reviewed it together. My team, there are no revision logs under your name, legal interrupted. No metadata traces. In fact, the only post-certification modifications are redlined under a different user account. She scrolled to page 47. Julia's mouth opened, but her brain couldn't decide what to say. It was like watching someone try to argue with a mirror. Then came the footnote. Let's scroll to page 58, legal said, as if guiding a tour through someone's personal hell. Bottom of the reconciliation section, submitted and time-stamped under credentialed access. She cleared her throat and read. Per section 7.3 of Internal Compliance Protocol, any alterations made to financial records post-certification by non-credentialed personnel, intended or otherwise, shall trigger a formal legal review, including but not limited to nullification of financial statements in investor documentation. The room went still. No gasps, no outraged whispers. Just nothing. A quiet so deep you could hear Julia's heart trying to crawl up her throat. The CEO didn't look at her. Not yet. He stared at the file, at the footnote, at the tiny, unremarkable line that had just torpedoed their clean sheet narrative. Did you alter any documents after they were signed off? He asked, his voice low. Julia shifted. Only formatting, presentation stuff. Nothing material. Just you signed them, he cut her off. Silence. Eagle didn't even need to nod. The weight of that sentence sat on the table like a lead briefcase. Her signature made it official. Her lack of credentials made it illegal. And my silence, it made it inevitable. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't need to. Silence, used right, can suffocate louder than any scream, and Julia had just choked on hers. The air in that room didn't move for at least 10 seconds after the footnote was read. Not a cough. Not a chair scrape. Just the kind of stillness you get when a dam cracks, and no one wants to be the one to point. The board chair leaned back, hands folded over his chest like he was watching a particularly grotesque surgery. His gaze slid to the CEO, who hadn't looked away from Julia. Not once. He just sat there, eyes boring into her, like he was watching a stranger in a mask slowly peel it off. Julia's lip twitched. She blinked hard once, then tried to laugh. It came out brittle and small. Look, this is all overblown. We were under pressure to finalize numbers, and honestly, I thought it was just formatting. I didn't change anything material. That clause, come on, we've never enforced that before. Investor rep #1 leaned toward investor rep #2 and muttered something sharp. The word exposure was clear, so was millions. Julia kept going, words unraveling like a cheap scarf. I mean, if we're being honest, half of these internal policies are just best practices, right? I didn't think anyone actually. The CEO raised a hand. Just one. She stopped mid-sentence, voice catching like she'd swallowed a nail. His voice was quiet. No fire. No thunder. Just a single question dropped like a guillotine. Can she fix this? She wasn't ambiguous. The room turned in unison, legal board members, the CFO who now looked like he might vomit, everyone's eyes landing on me. I didn't speak right away. Took one breath, let it fill the silence like a tide. Then I nodded once, clean, slow, unshakable. Legal leaned forward, relief flickering in her eyes like a dying bulb. Her files are intact, unaltered. We can refile the disclosures and correct the certification trail before the investor call. If we move fast. The CFO started to say something, but caught the CEO's glare and swallowed it whole. Julia sat back in her chair like someone had cut the strings holding her upright. The color drained from her face, her eyes darting from the screen to me to the closed door like she was calculating whether there was still time to flee or throw someone else under the bus. There wasn't, because now it was real. The reports were hers on paper, but the truth was mine. It lived in my files, my timestamps, my audit trail. She'd stolen the stage, but I owned the script, and now everyone in that room knew it. No one clapped. No one congratulated me. It wasn't that kind of victory. It was quieter, heavier. The kind that leaves bruises instead of trophies. The board chair finally spoke, voice tight. Have legal draft a disclosure memo. We'll need to update the investors before end of day. The CEO stood. Looked at Julia one last time, eyes flat. You're done here, he said. Not loud. Just final. She didn't argue, didn't cry. Sat there, small and quiet, while the consequences formed like storm clouds above her head. As people stood and shuffled toward the door, I stayed seated. Let them move around me like I was the eye of the storm. Calm, solid. Evan passed by and gave me a nod, small, respectful. Danielle, too. Even Dominic from finance clapped a hand gently on my shoulder as he exited. The CEO was the last to leave. He paused beside me, glanced at the closed laptop in front of me, the one that never left my sight, and said, "Good work." That was all, but it was enough. Not because I needed praise, not because I wanted revenge, but because sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who audit in silence, who stay late and keep receipts and eat their rage in 30-minute lunch breaks, sometimes they don't need to raise their voice. They just wait for the world to catch up. And when it finally does, they don't smile. They just nod. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.